So in today's video, I'm going to show you a secret method for turning any photograph of a cafe or a cute shopfront into a storybook style or almost urban sketching kind of illustration like this using Procreate. As usual, you can follow this method with any brushes you want, but I'll list mine in the description. And to start, we first need to choose a photo, and I've already placed it in here just as the top layer. And I want to make a very rough sketch just based on the major elements here. So I'll make a blank layer above my photo, I'll lower the opacity, and then I'll make my sketch on the layer above. And I'm really just trying to kind of section out my design here so all the proportions are right. But as you can see, I'm not going into any detail. This sketch isn't one we're going to save. It's just going to help us kind of place all the different elements and keep the proportions. After that, I'll zoom out a little bit, restore my photo to the original transparency, and then I'll make it kind of squished and shrunk just so I can fit it off to the side here and use it as a reference. And once everything is set up like this, we can finally move on and start painting it. So I'm going to make sure I'm painting on a blank layer down here below the paper texture and below the sketch. And I need to look at the photo and basically choose my favorite aspects of it. And we're going to sort of gear the detail level in this illustration so that only the best and favorite elements of it get the detail. This is going to save time, and it's also going to help the kind of overall vibe. And I think I'll start with the potted plant. And it's just going to be in this area, so I don't really need the sketch at the minute, so I'll just switch it off. And most of these details are going to be done with the smooth dry round. And the process is pretty simple. I'm just going to go through and basically lay down the main background wash color and shape, kind of for each kind of shape that builds the element here. Then after that, I'll grab the colored pencil brush or maybe the fine liner pen and use this to add a couple of line details and textures. And once the element's finished, I can switch my sketch back on and just kind of line it up. And since this is very symmetrical, I'm just going to duplicate this plant and use it on the other side instead of painting a totally separate one. And just so they don't look identical, I'm going to use the warp tool to kind of mix it up a little bit. And with these elements finished, I'm going to move on and paint the doors. So for those, I'll make a blank layer, and then I'll quickly illustrate these doors using basically the same method. Once again, just laying down a kind of main background wash, and then adding little details with the fine liner pen and the colored pencil brush. Now, as you can see here, the doors are on a separate layer than the plants. And right now, the doors are covering up the plants, so I'm just going to change the layer order. And it looks kind of okay, but you can definitely see there's a transparency issue. And that's just kind of the nature of using these watercolor brushes, and it's pretty easy to fix. Basically, I'm just going to make a layer that's just below the potted plants. And I'll choose some kind of very light beige tone. Then I'll use the fine liner pen because it's fully opaque. And I'm basically going to draw exactly behind where the potted plant is. So basically, the potted plant is up here. I'm drawing on this medium layer, and it's covering up the doors. And I'll just do my best to kind of block this out so there's less transparency where the plant overlaps. And with that transparency issue fixed, I'll basically continue with the same technique and paint the remaining detailed elements. Now for the signs in particular, I just prefer to kind of illustrate them and letter them flat. And then when I actually place them into position on the illustration, I'm going to use the distort tool to give the perspective. And there we go. I think these main elements turned out pretty nice. Now, this whole illustration style is sort of based on combining two different levels of detail. So the reason I illustrated these elements with a high level of detail is because those are just my favorite aspects of the original photo, just kind of things that stand out to me. And pretty much from now on, everything else we're going to illustrate is going to be in a much quicker, much looser painting style. And it's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to make another blank layer, but I'm going to place it here below all the main elements. And I'll use that smooth dry round brush just to rough out all the main kind of background colors for pretty much the rest of the stuff going on in the scene. And of course, with cafes and shop fronts, they're pretty much all going to have windows. Now at this point, just totally forget they exist and just fill in all the background colors, just as if there were no windows at all. And with the main colors for the background elements filled in like this, we can finally move on and start working on the interior. So I don't need the sketch anymore, so I'll switch it off. And I'll just make a layer just above the background here. And for this illustration, since the interior, isn't very clear or very important, I'm just gonna rough some random stuff in there using the colored pencil brush. Once again, I'm not worried about the windows at all. I'm gonna handle those in the next step. And once the interior details are sort of vaguely roughed in like this, we can finally move on and add the highlights on the windows, and this is what's really gonna make them pop. So for that, I'll make a blank layer just above those interior details. I'm gonna select pure white, and this time I'm gonna use a default Procreate brush. It's in the drawing tab here, it's called the Freycinet brush. And I'm basically gonna use it and kind of roughly scribble where the window is supposed to be. And since the window is also a door, it has a kind of free edge here. So I'm just gonna do a line to kind of define that edge. And then to clean it up, I'm just gonna use the eraser brush, basically just to carve this back into the shape of the door. And this looks pretty good, but I think the effect is way too strong. So I'm just gonna adjust it by lowering the opacity. Next, I'll move on and add some shading. So once again, I'll make a blank layer, but this time I'm gonna place it above everything, but still below the paper texture. And I'll use some kind of dark bluish tone, almost like an indigo. And then for the brush, I'll go back to the watercolor kit, and I'll use the water stain glazing brush. And I'm just gonna kind of very sparingly kind of brush this on in some of the shadow areas. And with a scene like this, there's gonna be hard shadows and soft shadows, but just for now, do everything as a hard shadow, because at the very end, we can blend it and soften it up. And once the shadows are roughed out like this, I recommend changing the transparency mode to multiply, lowering it to 0, and then slowly raising it back up just until you have the minimum amount of shading as possible, but still enough definition to see it. Now at this point, the whole scene is really starting to come together, and we're kind of on the home stretch here. At this point, I'm just gonna make another blank layer above everything, even the shadows here, and I'm gonna pencil in all the remaining little details that I forgot so far. So specifically, the kind of red arch around the door handles and the latches, and any other kind of cute things like that. If you want, you can also add some textures at this stage as well, especially like the welcome mat at the bottom there. I think it'll look nice if I give it a sort of woven texture. And lastly here, with all those remaining details finished, we can finally move on and do a little bit of quick blending. So before we do that, we have to merge everything so far together onto one layer. For the blending brush, I'm going to use the background water blender, and I'm just going to go in there and use this at a variety of, usually small sizes, and I'm going to start by blending all the soft shadows. And then after that, I'm gonna go over this whole illustration and look for any weird kind of digital looking overlapping strokes, and I'll just blend them until they fade away. And at this point, the illustration could be done, but I like to use the eraser brush set to the fine liner pen just to go along the whole edge of it and clean it up a little bit. And just like that, this simple illustrated cafe is finished. And here's the final result, just printed out on my Canon Pixma, as usual. Now, before I go, I just want to mention that when you're painting shop fronts, and basically anything this complicated in general, your eye is going to get drawn to whatever ends up having the most detail. So I would use the detail very, very sparingly. And that's why this workflow kind of works so well, because in the first place, when we start, we kind of spend our creative energy just making detailed illustrations of our favorite elements from the photo. And then by sort of front loading that and then making the rest of the process just very broad and general and scratchy, it really makes the detailed elements just stand out more without making the whole illustration look either too simple or too complicated. And that pretty much wraps it up. If you made it to the end, let me know in the comments. I really love to see that. Give this video a like if you think I've earned it. And here are 2 more illustration tutorials I think you'll love to watch next.